Hi, welcome to our second Policy Lab at Bits Bäume. We're so happy that you're here tonight. I'm Rike, I'm the coordinator of the Bits Bäume network. We are a civil society network connecting environmental, tech, development, NGOs, research institutes, and also unions. So we're pretty unique in the German landscape, and we aim to fight for more sustainable, democratic, and more human rights in the digital policy. And I think we have a great panel tonight, and we're so happy that you are here as well. If you want to keep in touch with us, you can join our newsletter. You will see QR codes on the walls. We also published claims for the next German administration. You can find them over there. And you can also take stickers with you and leave them in places, maybe. And yeah, one technical note, we are going to take photos tonight of the event. If you don't want to be in the photo, please notify Leo over there with a red headscarf. Yeah, so, and I wish you a wonderful, and we will stream the event, and I hope you know this because it was in the invitation, but we will also stream the event. If you don't want to be in the stream, sit over here, that's better. Yeah, and now I will give the stage to Johanna from the Bits Bäume Institut.
Danke, liebe Rike. Ich mache auf Deutsch weiter. Wir mischen heute auch ein bisschen Deutsch und Englisch. Für die, die mich noch nicht kennen, ich bin Johanna Hampf. Ich leite hier am Bits Bäume Institut den Bereich Transfer und Dialog. Ich sehe aber auch viele bekannte Gesichter hier. Ich freue mich sehr, dass Sie heute den Weg hier zu uns ins Bits Bäume Institut gefunden haben, zum Policy Lab. Und wir freuen uns auch, dass wir Gastgeber dieser Veranstaltung sein dürfen, weil die Frage nach einer demokratisch gestalteten digitalen Infrastruktur steht eben auch im Zentrum unserer Forschung. Die vergangenen Monate haben ja sehr eindrücklich gezeigt, wie eng digitale Souveränität mit der Stabilität unserer Demokratien verknüpft ist. Ob es eben Debatten um KI-generierte Desinformation in Wahlkämpfen waren, die zunehmende Konzentration von Plattformmacht in den Händen weniger Tech-Giganten, gruselig, oder die geopolitischen Spannungen, die digitale Lieferketten und kritische Infrastruktur bedrohen. All diese Entwicklungen verdeutlichen, digitale Technologien sind längst keine neutralen Werkzeuge mehr, sondern zentrale Machtfaktoren. Die Art und Weise, wie sie reguliert, kontrolliert und gestaltet werden, entscheidet mit darüber, wie resilient unsere Demokratien in Zukunft sein werden. Hier am Bits Bäume Institut erforschen wir genau diese Wechselwirkung zwischen Digitalisierung und Technologie und Gesellschaft, und wir fragen uns eben, wie können die digitale Technologien so gestalten, dass Demokratie, Partizipation und gesellschaftliche Resilienz gestärkt werden, welche politischen Rahmenbedingungen dafür notwendig sind, um digitale Souveränität zu fördern, und wie können wir den Einfluss monopolistischer Strukturen begrenzen. Die Fragen spielen eben heute auch im Rahmen des Policy Labs eine große Rolle, und wir freuen uns, dass wir unsere tollen Gäste begrüßen können. Ich freue mich ganz besonders auf Katharina Nokun, Publizistin, Politik- und Wirtschaftswissenschaftlerin, Cecilia Rikap, leitende Forscherin und Professorin für internationale politische Ökonomie am UCL Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose, Cédric Durand, Professor für politische Ökonomie an der Universität Genf, Alexandra Gese, Mitglied des Europäischen Parlaments und Digitalexpertin der Grünen-Fraktion im EU-Parlament, und Adriana Groh, die Mitbegründerin des Souveränen Tech-Fonds. An der Stelle bleibt mir nicht mehr viel zu sagen, uns allen einen sehr inspirierenden, austauschreichen Abend zu wünschen. Und ich bitte Katharina Nokun auf die Bühne, die die erste Keynote halten wird.
Ja, wir leben in spannenden Zeiten. Das ist immer so dieses bedrohliche Zitat, was dann meistens so die Shitshow der allgemeinen Nachrichtenlage einleitet. Genau das habe ich heute vor. Und in schwierigen Zeiten sucht man ja gerne nach sinnstiftenden Zitaten wichtiger Menschen. Ich bin natürlich fragwürdige Internetseiten durchgegangen, um mein heutiges Zitat zu finden. Das lautet: Krise ist ein produktiver Zustand. Man muss ihr nur den Beigeschmack der Katastrophe nehmen. Ja, ich weiß, schwierig. Ich finde es auch schwierig, muss ich sagen, weil wir momentan in einer Zeit leben, wo ich den Beigeschmack, den fahlen Beigeschmack des autoritären Umschwungs nicht von meiner Zunge bekomme, egal wie viel ich Zähne putze. Wir leben in einem Dauerzustand der Polykrise und ich glaube, man kann viel darüber streiten, ob es in den 70ern, Ölkrise, Kalter Krieg, wirklich weniger simultane Krisen gab als heute. Ich glaube aber heute, dass wir tatsächlich eine andere Kategorie von unterschiedlichen gleichzeitigen Krisen haben. Wir einmal einen Ruck ins Autoritäre in vielen bisher stabilen Demokratien. Und wir haben gleichzeitig die globale Klimakrise, die an unserer Tür klopft. Und das Problem ist, beide Situationen befruchten sich in wirklich unglückseliger Weise gegenseitig, wenn wir nichts unternehmen. Und ich muss sagen, ich habe Bauchschmerzen, wenn ich morgens aufstehe, weil ich weiß, ich werde die Nachrichtenseiten öffnen und Doomscrolling betreiben, wie Nachrichtenlesen ja heutzutage heißt. Und ich werde lesen, was in den paar Stunden passiert ist in den USA, in denen ich geschlafen habe. Ja, und das ist meistens nicht schön. Es ist nicht schön zu lesen, dass wir plötzlich vom Präsidenten der USA, einem Land, in dem viele Tech-Giganten, die unser Leben bestimmen, dass dieser Präsident Dinge von sich gibt, die einem autoritären Herrscher gleichkommen. Dass man sich selbst gleichsetzt mit dem Staat, dass man sich selbst über das Gesetz stellt. Da ist von Checks and Balances ehrlich gesagt nichts mehr übrig geblieben, würde ich sagen. Und es gibt eine Propagandatechnik, die ist ziemlich alt und die ist heute populärer denn je zuvor. Und an die muss ich oft denken, wenn ich Nachrichten lese. Die nennt sich Accusation in a Mirror, ja? Also eine Anschuldigung in den Spiegel. Ich werfe der Gegenseite genau das vor, was ich selbst vorhabe zu tun, ganz bewusst. Und ich denke daran, wenn ich beispielsweise Nachrichten wie diese hier lese. Ja, erinnert sich noch jemand, Elon Musk, Meinungsfreiheit retten, deshalb Twitter kaufen? Ja, großer Witz der Geschichte. Ein Schelm, der Böses dabei denkt, wenn heutzutage Reuters berichtet, dass Richterinnen in den USA sich zunehmend bedroht fühlen, weil Elon Musk gerade dazu übergegangen ist, massiv Tweets abzusetzen in Richtung unabhängige Justiz und ganz klar seine Anhängerschaft quasi in eine Richtung drängt, dass man sagt, wenn die Justiz nicht in unserem Sinne entscheidet, dann müssen wir das eben zur Disposition stellen. Meinungsfreiheit gilt nicht für Richterinnen und Richter, die das kritisch kommentieren wollen. Die wollten sich gegenüber der Nachrichtenagentur nur anonym äußern, weil sie befürchten, infolgedessen Drohungen zu bekommen. Meinungsfreiheit heißt in Augen von Elon Musk, das Recht des Stärkeren gewinnt. Das hat nichts mit Meinungsfreiheit in einer Demokratie zu tun. Wir könnten sehr viel über das sprechen, was Elon Musk in den letzten Tagen, Wochen, Monaten, ja vielleicht sogar Jahren gesagt, getan hat. Ich möchte nun mal hier ein paar größere Haufen präsentieren. Beispielsweise die Tatsache, dass viele Expertinnen weltweit alarmiert sind darüber, dass Elon Musk momentan anscheinend AI ohne jegliche effektive Aufsicht auf hochsensible Daten offenbar loslässt. Und ich würde gerne daran glauben, dass es keinen Präzedenzfall schafft. Mir fehlt aber mittlerweile dieser Glaube. Und ja, nochmal zu diesem Accusation in the Mirror, da wurde oft der politischen Gegenseite vorgeworfen, also demokratischen Parteien, demokratischen Organisationen, man würde eine Politisierung der Institutionen beabsichtigen. Ja? Accusation in the Mirror, genau das passiert gerade. Und Institutionen, die nicht reformierbar sind, die werden kurzerhand zusammengestrichen und weggekürzt. Beispielsweise das Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, das nach der Finanzkrise gegründet wurde, was Millionen und Abermillionen im Sinne der Verbraucherinnen eingespart hat, weil eben effektive Regulierung gegen Missbrauch von Marktmacht durchgesetzt wurde. Ja, da arbeiten jetzt in Zukunft nicht mehr so viele Menschen, würde ich sagen. Ein Schelm, wer Eigennutz in solchen Situationen unterstellt. Die USA drohen, ins Autoritäre zu kippen und diese Entwicklung ist sehr unverhohlen. Es mehren sich jetzt schon in den ersten Wochen der Amtszeit von Präsident Trump Stimmen aus dem Lager, die sagen, ja, dritte Amtszeit, gar kein Problem. Sieht die US-Verfassung zwar nicht vor, aber anscheinend ist man nicht nur in Bezug auf Entscheidungen von Richterinnen und Richtern bereit, in Zukunft eine größere Flexibilität walten zu lassen. Ich übersetze das mal. Ein Rechtsstaat, ein demokratischer Rechtsstaat wird damit effektiv am Ende. Und das Silicon Valley schaut nicht nur zu, das Silicon Valley applaudiert, physisch. Ja? Das ist kein Sprichwort, übertragener Sinn. Der Applaus ist da. Ja? Und es gibt nicht nur erste Signale, dass man dieses Spiel mitspielen will und nicht stoppen will. Also die roten Flaggen hängen mittlerweile auf allen Masten. Mark Zuckerberg hat quasi einen Raum zugesichert, dass sein Diskursraum, ja, also dass der Diskursraum von Meta zukünftig bessere Bedingungen für das Mager-Ökosystem garantieren wird. Ja. Das bedeutet das nämlich, wenn es keine unabhängigen Faktenchecks mehr in Kooperation mit Meta in den USA gibt. Wir haben ein großes Problem. Ihr erinnert euch vielleicht daran, vor einigen Tagen, man erinnert sich auch mittlerweile schwierig daran, weil es so viel ist. Und im Übrigen, das ist auch eine Strategie von autoritären Akteuren. Ja? So schnell uns überrollen mit vielen kleinen Entscheidungen, dass wir vergessen, das große Bild zu sehen und immer nur den kleinen Dingen hinterherrennen. Erinnert euch noch daran, dass eine der größten Presseagenturen der Welt am Weißen Haus ausgeschlossen wurde, weil sie sich geweigert haben, den Golf von Mexiko nicht mehr Golf von Mexiko zu nennen, weil es Trump irgendwie eingefallen ist, dass es eine schlechte Idee wäre. Er hat einen anderen Namen sich ausgedacht. Das hat massive Konsequenzen für diese Nachrichtenagentur. Und naja, wer gehofft hat, dass das Silicon Valley die Fahne der Demokratie in schwierigen Zeiten hochhält, der hat sich an der Stelle geirrt. In Deutschland heißt der Golf von Mexiko noch Golf von Mexiko. In den USA heißt er nicht mehr so bei Google. Aber wird man sagen, gut, ich kann ja danach vielleicht die Nachrichtenlage in Deutschland lesen oder in den USA, nachdem ich mich von dieser Shitshow abgewendet habe und mich in der Sicherheit wiegen, dass wir hier noch in weitgehend demokratischen Gefilden leben. Ich wäre mir da nicht so sicher. Ich würde mich nicht in dieser Hängebatte ausruhen. Und wir sehen auch, dass es wahrscheinlich ist, dass eine Form von Druck ausgeübt wird, in Form von, in Anführungsstrichen, Deals, ich wollte ja eher von Erpressung sprechen, dass auch europäisches Recht vielleicht zu einer Verhandlungsmasse werden könnte. Und eine Verhandlungsmasse bei einem Deal, der nicht auf Augenhöhe stattfindet, ja, das Ergebnis ist meist nicht zugunsten der Bittstellerin. Und das wird auch in diesem Fall so sein. Mir macht es große Sorgen, wenn ein gewisser J.D. Vance, Vizepräsident der USA, auf der Münchner Sicherheitskonferenz eine Rhetorik auspackt, die unverhohlen von einem Kulturkampf spricht, von einem Kulturkrieg. Ja? Und man sagt auch, ja, das ist ein anderes Stichwort, nicht aus dubiosen Internetseiten, Krieg sei die Fortsetzung der Politik mit anderen Mitteln. Das, was wir momentan in der Auseinandersetzung zwischen der Europäischen Union und den USA sehen, ist ein historischer Bruch. Und dieser historische Bruch kann auch dazu führen, dass Druck ausgeübt wird auf die EU, beispielsweise den EU Digital Services Act, den AI Act und andere Dinge, im Gegenzug für andere Dinge vielleicht nicht mehr als so wichtig und so durchsetzungsfähig zu erachten, nur im Nachhinein aufzuweichen. Diese Sorge ist, glaube ich, berechtigt. Und ich sehe weit und breit nur wenig Alternativen abseits anderer problematischer Konkurrenzsysteme, wenn wir uns dann sagen, naja, okay, wir sind abhängig von Big Tech aus den USA, wenden wir uns vielleicht einer anderen Abhängigkeit zu. Ich glaube, China, andere autoritäre Systeme sind Teil des Problems und sollten nicht Teil der Antwort sein. Was also tun? Max Frisch soll einmal gesagt haben, dass die Krise ein produktiver Zustand ist. Man muss ihr nur den Beigeschmack der Katastrophe nehmen. Ich glaube das nicht, aber ich glaube, wir sehen hier ein Window of Opportunity. Es wird gerade sehr viel über Geld gesprochen, auch in Deutschland. Und es wird sehr viel über kritische Infrastruktur gesprochen. Wir reden auch sehr viel über Europa sicher machen. Ja, aber was bedeutet eigentlich Sicherheit in der vernetzten Welt? Was bedeutet halt eigentlich eine wehrhafte Demokratie? Kann die Bundeswehr die Cybersicherheit von Deutschland sichern, wenn wir von Big Tech aus einem Staat angewiesen sind, der droht, ins Autoritäre zu kippen? Ich glaube nicht. Und wir müssen eine alte Diskussion wieder ins Zentrum rücken, in der recht klar ist, dass der Status quo nicht das Ergebnis eines Marktprozesses ist, der in irgendeiner Weise perfekt wäre. Ja, also ein Kommilitone hat gesagt, naja, also die unsichtbare Hand des Marktes, die gibt dir eigentlich, wenn du dir die Digitalisierung anguckst, eine Ohrfeige nach der anderen. Wir haben unperfekte Marktstrukturen an jeder Ecke. Wir haben Economies of Scale, of Scope, wir haben vertikale Integration, horizontale Integration, wir haben ja Netzwerkeffekte, die darauf hinauslaufen, dass wir Strukturen haben, die ähnlich sind wie natürliche Monopole in den alten Märkten. Und in den alten Märkten haben wir eben gelernt, dass wir Regulierung brauchen, die im Zweifel auch sagt, nein, dieser Aufkauf dieses Unternehmens, dieser Zusammenschluss, der ist zum Nachteil der Verbraucherin. Das lassen wir nicht zu. Und ich habe das Gefühl, die Regulierungsbehörden und auch die politischen Entscheiderinnen haben einfach gepennt in Sachen Digitalisierung und die Reichweite, die Tragweite dieser Entscheidung nicht erkannt, die sie damals getroffen haben. Und Nichthandeln ist auch eine Entscheidung. Nichthandeln hat dazu geführt, dass die unperfekten Strukturen des Marktes die Ergebnisse hervorgebracht haben, die sie hervorgebracht haben. Hier ein Applied-Beispiel aus der realen Welt. Vor vielen Jahren habe ich mal meine Facebook-Daten abgefragt. Ich bin in der Werbekategorie für Stress. Ja, man weiß nicht, mache ich Stress, habe ich Stress, im Zweifel beides. Aber dieses Beispiel zeigt ja sehr eindeutig, naja, also die Nutzungsbedingungen sind nicht ideal für Verbraucherinnen. Es gab in den letzten Jahren so viele Studien, die Verbraucherinnen gefragt haben, naja, wenn du frei entscheiden könntest, würdest du dieser Änderung der Klausel der AGB zustimmen? Und die Antwort war mehrheitlich, nur, warum sollte ich? Ja? Aber wie gesagt, ein Deal, der nicht auf Augenhöhe stattfindet, der ist in der Regel zu Nachteil der Bittstellerin. Und in einem quasi monopolistischen Markt wird es halt eben schwierig. Und wir sollten uns nicht einreden lassen, auf gar keinen Fall, dass wir in irgendeiner Weise einfach sozusagen die Regeln der neuen Welt akzeptieren sollten. Regeln werden gemacht. Und mein Gefühl ist, dass wir eigentlich von vornherein hier so eine Doppelmoral hatten. Ne? Also viele haben es nicht mitbekommen. Vor vielen, vielen Jahren hat Mark Zuckerberg mehrere Grundstücke rund um sein Haus aufgekauft, damit niemand ihm in den Garten schauen kann. Das war ungefähr die Zeit, als er verkündet hat, Datenschutz wäre tot. Ja. Und wir sollten viel mehr darüber sprechen, was wir uns eigentlich eingebrockt haben. Ja, also vor einigen Monaten ging die Nachricht rum, dass Meta Daten von einer 17-Jährigen an die Polizei herausgegeben hat. Ihr Verbrechen war, sie wollte sich über Abtreibungen informieren. Man sollte sich mal die Frage stellen, was für Daten in Zukunft an wen herausgegeben werden und wer an der Spitze welcher Behörden sitzt. Schauen Sie sich mal an, wer beispielsweise jetzt gerade ins FBI abkommandiert wurde, ja, was diese Daten alles enthüllen könnten. Ja? Vor allem im politischen Kontext. Und wie man damit auch Menschen einschüchtern kann. Und inwiefern das Strukturen sind, in denen Demokratie effektiv funktionieren kann. Damals beim Snowden-Skandal Das war eine interessante Zeit. Ich habe viele, viele Stunden vor dem Bundestag verbracht. Da gab es einen Untersuchungsausschuss. Wir haben demonstriert für Asyl für Snowden. Hat leider nicht geklappt, wie wir alle wissen. Aber ich glaube, damals hätten viel mehr Leute an unserer Seite gestanden, wenn sie gewusst hätten, dass Jahre später ein Donald Trump eben teilweise diese Befugnisse in einer anderen Weise nutzen kann und sie mit neuen Daten verknüpfen kann. Ich glaube, auch in den USA hätte die Situation anders ausgesehen. Und ich war sehr glücklich, als einige Jahre später Edward Snowden eine Kampagne der Free Software Foundation Europe unterstützt hat, in der wir gefordert haben, freie Software, also Software, die für staatliche Institutionen entwickelt wird, sollte eben also freie Software sein, sollte freie Standards nutzen. Und rückblickend war das eigentlich eine viel zu kleine Forderung, aber es bleibt eine wichtige Forderung. Ich glaube, wir dürfen uns nicht dieser Shitshow hingeben, in diesem kleinen der schlechten Nachrichten und immer hier und da nachbessern. Ich glaube, und deshalb freue ich mich heute hier zu sein, wir müssen mal öfter und mehr und intensiver darüber diskutieren, was ist eigentlich unsere Utopie, was kann uns retten, was kann uns Kraft geben. Ja? Und das ist nicht hier und da eine kleine Veränderung. Ich glaube, wir brauchen den großen Wurf. Und es ist mir egal, wie unrealistisch das ist. Weil ehrlich, das ist eine der wenigen Optionen, die ich sehe, um eine zukunftsfähige, tragfähige, digitale Demokratie in irgendeiner Art und Weise zu haben. Und mag sein, das klingt jetzt wie Sozialismus, das klingt jetzt wie Revolution und das klingt so ein bisschen danach trinken wir Wein und sind gefrustet und es klappt eh nicht. Aber ich glaube, Geschichte ist irgendwo eine Pfadabhängigkeit. Und dieselbe Pfadabhängigkeit, die uns aus diesen unperfekten Märkten zu dieser Shitshow heute geführt hat, die kann uns eben auch zu blühenden Landschaften führen. Manchmal sind kleine Entscheidungen einzelner Menschen wegweisend dafür, ob wir in einer geschlossenen, gated Community kommunizieren, leben oder ob wir ein offenes, freies Biotop haben. Und ich glaube, hier sitzen viele Menschen, die in so einer Situation eine gute und richtige Entscheidung treffen würden. Und ich glaube aber, wir brauchen nicht nur einzelne Menschen, wir brauchen Gruppen, wir brauchen Zusammenschluss, wir müssen verdammt nochmal Banden bilden. Und ich hoffe, dass wir in der Diskussion Wege finden, dahin zu kommen, zu dieser besseren Welt. Vielen Dank.
Vielen lieben Dank, Katharina Nokun. It's a shit show. But there's hope. Maybe there's hope. Our next speaker is Cecilia Rikap, and maybe she will show us some ways how we can regain digital sovereignty. And Cecilia, the stage is yours. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. Just one second. So you should be able to see my screen in 1 second, probably. Yeah. Or not. Okay, perfect. So, hi, everyone. First, I want to thank the organizers. This is really a pleasure. I'm very glad to have the opportunity not only to present this report to all of you and to motivate it with some of the outcomes of my research, but also to engage in what I'm sure will be a very stimulating and relevant debate afterwards. And before I just jump into what motivated this report, I wanted to just highlight, first of all, that this report is the result of a collective effort for when in the process of writing what we describe as our Reclaiming Digital Sovereignty white paper, a roadmap to build a digital stack for people on the planet. Over 100 people contributed from different parts of the world. This is not only a European initiative, this really is an international initiative beyond Europe. And among all of the people that contributed, 5 of us took the role of putting together the report and adding to the report part of the policy implications that our research was showing. And among the five of us, Cedric Duran is sitting there with me, and I'm Cecilia Rikap. But I just wanted to start by highlighting that I think that this way of working was not only stimulating and interesting, but also shows part of this need for more collaboration that already the previous speaker was highlighting. So I think that this is part of how we should think of future policy discussions, like putting people together. And yeah, without any further ado, I would just go straight to situate our report and say a few things that perhaps complement what Adriana was saying to motivate our policy recommendations. So let me start by a picture that we've seen many times already. And I think that if we think about this Western world's ruling coalition and what it means for society, it's quite obvious that they have control over the public square. They decide how debates takes place in today's public square, which are their social networks, and this hijacks democratic deliberation. But also, and this is extremely concerning, states are losing their autonomy. Of course, when we say states are losing their autonomy, we need to differentiate types of states, because states like the Argentinian state was always in capitalism subordinated to the US state in particular, and also to Europe to begin with, but then also afterwards. So it's not that we are saying here, okay, states were all autonomous before and they had a capacity to be fully sovereign, but what we are seeing is a context in which big tech companies, because they control the whole digital technologies value chain, and when I say control, I'm not saying they own. Of course, there are many other actors, and I will go to that in 1 second, but the fact that big tech companies have, in particular from the US and secondarily from China, control digital technologies value chain is directly hijacking the possibilities of states to rule. Because to rule, you need information technologies, you need digital technologies, you need to harvest data and understand what's going on in your country. You need to create indicators, you need to have systems that enable you to provide healthcare, education, and even for the defense sector. For all this and more, digital technologies are becoming the main tool. And these technologies and the type of technologies that we are getting are controlled by just a handful of companies that now are working hand in hand with the US government to rule the world. And one thing that we need to highlight, and this is why I was already emphasizing that they control, but they control beyond ownership, and this doesn't mean that they are the only ones producing these technologies. And this is the third angle that I want to highlight in my brief presentation before heading into the actual proposal. And this is what can be described as a form of economic neocolonialism, or what I would describe as expanded dependency. And why expanded dependency and not simply neocolonialism? Indeed, we have two powerful countries, the US, China, with their digital corporations controlling what's going on in the rest of the world. But we also have complicit actors. We also have, for instance, in Latin America, platforms like Mercado Libre that work under the technologies of big tech, that use these technologies to further control those that are further below, to control the users of its platforms, and also not only individuals, but also companies that are offering, for instance, in its e-commerce platform. And something similar can be said of companies like SAP or Siemens, that also have their technologies more and more integrated into big tech companies' clouds. So this is not simply the ruling power of a few big tech companies, but actually a full structure of different leading corporations controlling the crucial pieces of knowledge that could enable us all to live a better life. And instead of that, they are using this knowledge to subordinate us even more. So how is this happening? And let me give you some input from my research in terms of how was it that, in particular, US big tech companies ended up controlling not only the outcomes of this technology, but also how the research, the underpinning research in the AI field takes place. I will not explain the details of this network, but I want to give you a sense of what you're looking at here. So just allow me this brief intro to network analysis. So this is a network that is portraying the top 100 organizations that in terms of the presentation of papers at the most important AI conferences in the world between 2018 and 2020. When we think of a discipline, when we think of a field of research, and we think about where the agenda is set, how is it that we end up asking ourselves certain questions instead of others, we need to think of this type of convenings. We need to think of the places that everyone associates with where the frontier ideas are presented and published. In the healthcare sector, that would be Nature or Science. But in the AI field, because also of how fast technologies are developed, these are more conferences than academic journals. And in these conferences, what one can trace over the years is an increased centrality of Google and Microsoft, to the point where by 2018-2020, these two companies were at the center of the network. There are different ways to identify when one sees a network and we see a lot of connections, a lot of organizations connecting to each other. We have companies from different parts of the world in this network. We have universities from different and public research organizations from different parts of the world in this network. And one could think, okay, they are all collaborating equally. They are all co-developing knowledge together. A way to spot power relations here and who has the capacity to define the research agenda is to look at who sits at the center of the network. And this is why it matters not only the number of publications that these companies are having in these convenings, but also the fact that they are exactly at the center of the network. And this is not something that I created by going bit by bit and looking at everything, but this was created with an algorithm. It's not that I told the algorithm, hey, put Google and Microsoft at the center. This is the outcome of how the research community in the AI field is structured, with big tech companies at the core. This means that they can not only influence with their own research agenda and priorities the organizations that are directly collaborating with them. In which forms? Well, not only by receiving money from big tech companies, but also simply collaborating for the development of a paper, for a project, for a research project that has a paper as an outcome. And another thing that I observed and that probably you've heard of is that there are hundreds of scholars that are at the same time working for the university and for a big tech company. Like myself, I have an affiliation at University College London and at a French university. So, and then we have Yann LeCun, who is Meta's chief AI scientist, and at the same time is a professor at the New York University. So the entanglement between these companies and universities go way beyond what we've seen in other fields like pharma. Their capacity to steer the research and control ultimately what the most recognized institutions in the public sector are doing is huge. But then when it comes, one could still think, okay, then they go and present the research at these conferences. It's their research agenda, but at least they are sharing it with others. Well, not precisely, because what they share is the outcomes of the research, but not really what's inside the models, how the models were developed, what data was used for training the models, what are the parameters of the model. So it's a partial sharing of the knowledge to just convey a clear message in terms of what the priorities are for the rest of the community. And to identify the extent of this appropriation, I invite you to look at these type of indicators. I've been doing this for many companies. I'm showing this for Microsoft, but I could be showing the same data for any other big tech company and also for companies from other sectors as well, which is a simple comparison between the share of co-authored papers, which in a way illustrates the extent of the collaboration with different organizations, how research is co-produced together in collaborations with universities, with public research organizations, with other companies as well, and compare this share, which for Microsoft is almost 90%, with the share of co-owned patents. So when it comes to appropriating that research, we can see that in the case of Microsoft, it's only 1% of its patents that is shared with non-Microsoft organizations. So really this speaks of a huge knowledge capture. And this knowledge capture also has a geopolitical lens, because the clusters that are closer to me are clusters that are mostly integrated by Chinese organizations, whereas the clusters that are on the other side of the screen are clusters mostly populated by non-Chinese organizations, notably, of course, US and European research institutions or universities. And if you look who's sitting in between, this is Microsoft. And this means that Microsoft has a capacity to influence not only the research in the Western world, but also to profit and influence the research that China is doing. But this is one part of how these companies have developed a capacity to control the whole digital technologies value chain. The other part is the relationship that they have established both with the open source community and with startups. So basically, the coding and development part of this story. We can, of course, add to that the fact that they are the largest companies when it comes to harvesting data. But focusing here in the co-development of the technology, because my emphasis here in this part of my presentation is to emphasize that digital technologies are the outcome of things that are developed jointly by many, many, many organizations, by thousands of people collaborating. We are co-producing this knowledge all together, and then this knowledge is appropriated by a few. And this can also be seen at the level of startups, and in the startup world, there is a quite interesting phenomenon that illustrates what's going on, which is how big tech companies operate as corporate venture capitalists. If we go and see, for instance, the number of companies that received money from different venture capitalists by February 2024, the 10 largest investors in AI startups included Google and Microsoft. I'm particularly interested here in the number of companies that are receiving money from this big tech, because the larger the number, the larger your capacity to control, and control without acquiring the companies. So this, of course, goes unnoticed until recently, and still nothing has happened, goes unnoticed for the antitrust regulators. So the competition and markets authorities are not looking at this type of relationships, and when they started doing it recently, at least until now, it has led to no concrete outcomes. But the more I look into this, the more I see established core of companies that by providing their funding to startups have a capacity to do two things at the same time. They have a capacity to access to their technology, so they have privileged access to what everyone is doing. While they are not sharing what they are doing in-house, they do get access to what startups are doing, and they can also exercise a form of technological lock-in, and they can steer the technology that the startups are developing. And why can they do that? They can do that in part because of the role of the cloud. Before entering into the cloud, just to say that the table here on the bottom doesn't speak only about AI startups, it's about startups in general, also data for February 2024, and it gives you a sense of how diverse this strategy is among big tech companies. Some of them are using it much more prominently than others. We can discuss about this later on if you're interested in the topic in particular, but it also gives you a flavor of how big this problem is. Because if we only look at the AI startup companies, we are speaking of hundreds of thousands of companies. But once we start looking at the whole startup community, and we see that, for instance, Google, by February 2024, was among the top investors of almost 2,500 companies. These are 2,500 companies developing digital technologies under the control of Google, even if Google hasn't acquired them. Because what they are doing are technologies that are not only of the interest of Google, of course, because otherwise they wouldn't have invested money, but also by investing the money, they can influence what they are doing. And this is pretty much what we've seen with the history of OpenAI and Microsoft. But let me go to the cloud side of this story, because actually sometimes the money doesn't really arrive to the account of the startup, but it's just what some people in the industry describe as compute vouchers or cloud credits. So basically, the startup gets an amount of money that they can spend only on cloud services of Amazon, Microsoft, or Google. Because the cloud is a highly concentrated market. We have 3 companies, and it's impossible to interoperate between their services. There needs to be additional coding and money spent to move away from one cloud to go to the other. But the cloud is not simply a place where the models are trained, or it's not only a place where startups and other organizations can store even us, can store their files. The cloud is much more than just a storage capacity sold as a service or computing power sold as a service. The cloud is really computing services supermarket. Every digital technology can be purchased as a service on the cloud. And we are speaking here of software, of data, of platforms, you name it. AI models, of course. So not only infrastructure, everything sold as a service. And in this supermarket, it's not just directly Amazon, Microsoft, Google offering their own services. We also have these startup companies offering their services. So these startups are at the same time consuming services on the cloud and offering their services on the cloud. When they consume the services, when they run out of the credit, they need to pay every time that they are consuming a service. And when they sell their service on the cloud, they also need to pay, because part of what they get goes to the hyperscaler, goes to Amazon, Microsoft, or Google. And they are called partners, but this is far from a partnership of equals. The startups or any other company, even SAP, runs its software as a service on the cloud of Amazon, Microsoft, and Google. But how this is done, even in the case of Amazon's marketplace, when a company can increase or modify the price of its service, is defined by the cloud hegemon, is defined by Amazon, Microsoft, and Google. So this is not a business agreement, again, among equals, but it's a form of control beyond ownership, even in the case when there was no investment at all in the startup or the other company. Because those that are defining the conditions under which these technologies are produced, exchanged, and consumed are a few big tech companies. And if we go strictly to AI today, the official or mainstream model way of developing AI models is on the cloud. So AI is being developed on the cloud, then the AI models are exchanged as a service on the cloud. So if we have an company that is trying to develop an AI application and will need to call an AI model, it will do all that on the cloud, and then they will consume the service on the cloud. So we can never leave the cloud. It's a supermarket that has trapped us, not only because it's the only supermarket in town, but it's also the only factory in town, and it's also the only household in town, because there is no possibility to do anything outside of the cloud when it comes to digital technologies. And on top of all this, most of the services are sold, and I say most because they even offer open source services on the cloud, but most of these services are offered as black boxes. And this, from an economics of innovation or learning perspective for organizations, is very problematic, because there is no possibility to do reverse engineering. Before, when we were thinking of, for instance, a peripheral country purchasing a machine from Germany and then adopting it in its production process, there was a possibility to do reverse engineering. China has done a lot of reverse engineering, actually, of German machines, among others. But this is not feasible with digital technology sold on the cloud. They are sold as black boxes, so it's not possible to know what's the code inside. It's not possible to open up the technology and learn by doing, using, and interacting with the technology. So the dependency lasts forever. It's not like a Netflix subscription. Of course, if I one day decide to cancel my subscription, I will lose the opportunity to watch Netflix series and other things. But I can do it. I can still do it. If I'm a company that has built all its architecture on the cloud, whose solution is running on the cloud, it cannot decide from one day to the other that it's terminating this quote-unquote subscription. It will need to make a lot of investment, and it may even not be possible to do it in another way. Why? Because when it comes to the demand, when it comes to where any organization, even states, are going when it comes to purchasing digital services, they go here. So the type of network effects that we see in the other platforms are also happening here. And as someone that I interviewed from Amazon very bluntly told me, it is not in your control to switch to other companies easily. This person that I interviewed, and I interviewed over 100 people from different companies, many from big tech, but not only, and mostly from large companies. But this person in particular worked to build stickiness. So basically worked to make it harder for users, be them also partners that then were selling the technology to leave the cloud. That was the role of this person. And when it comes to who is consuming these technologies, again, I insist, this is not only companies from the tech sector. Every company, and this is also why I was doing all these interviews, every company, every large company has migrated to the cloud, from automobile industry companies to mass consumption goods companies, luxury goods companies, all the leading corporations, big pharma companies, they have all migrated to the cloud. They do so because even if they become subordinated to big tech technologies, this enables them a capacity to better control those that they are already subordinating in their global value chains, their franchisees, their platforms. So even companies like Netflix and Uber operate on these companies' clouds. And also, soon, the German government. So I think that there is really a need to build an alternative. And if this is not enough to motivate the alternative, let me go to one additional angle or motive. And this refers to the impact of adopting generative AI in particular for research. Because AI is not only a general purpose technology, it's becoming a method of invention, a method that it's been used also for every creative industry. So it's replacing part of our creativity. And here, what different results from research show, including research by Microsoft, which is why I'm highlighting also in yellow the Microsoft research, Microsoft research, Microsoft research, is that adopting these technologies undermines our skills. On this hand side, you can read it clearly. 82% of scientists, these people are working on new material discoveries. 82% of scientists report reduced satisfaction with their work due to decreased creativity and skill underutilization. But also Microsoft recognizes it when they say, and I will read it from here because I cannot read that part of the screen, higher confidence in generative AI is associated with less critical thinking. Generative AI shifts the nature of critical thinking towards information verification, response integration, and task stewardship. So basically, these companies are hijacking our capacities of thinking and learning. And this is resulting in even greater inequalities. Inequalities also at the level of learning, even at the level of research in general. We risk ending up with only one way, one method of producing new knowledge, of producing new works of art. And this is not only at the expense of diversity and pluralism, which is needed, and confrontation, which is also needed to make progress in science, but it is also splitting the world between a few that know how these algorithms are made and what decisions are made and what is the data that is used for training them, and a majority that doesn't know and can only adopt and become users of the technology. So no wonder why we're living in this world. And this is definitely a wake-up call for those of you who doesn't know. This is Argentina's president, Javier Milei. The others, I think that you already know them. And this is a wake-up call not only because of the rise of the far right. I think it's also a wake-up call concerning how to build an alternative, and this is why I included that chart that compares the recent German elections with also the French elections of less than a year ago. This comes from the Financial Times, and for me, it's also a wake-up call for building left, green, and progressive international coalitions, for following the example of France, fighting against the far right with a progressive and leftist coalition. And this is a time of confrontation. This is not a time for appeasement to the center. I don't think that that is the solution. At least the younger voters clearly know this. The older don't know it that much. But I really think that because this is a time of confrontation, we are not setting the terms of the confrontation. We are pushed to say that to confront those that are, for instance, claiming that state apparatuses should be minimized or directly exterminated, we need to have a reply for that. And I think that our reply shouldn't be timid. Our reply should be very clear. We need more and better public sectors. And these more and better public sectors cannot be built without independent digital technologies, public-led digital technologies for people and the planet. And a better public sector cannot be built in an undemocratic way. We need more democracy. We need to include more the needs of people and also the wills of the people. And we cannot build this alternative without taking into account the planetary boundaries. And I think that this is why this better public sector must be built, putting people and the planet ahead of profits. And this is why it needs to be public-led. There is nothing against the companies, the private companies in our proposal, but it's just a clear understanding that private companies cannot be the ones ruling. The decisions cannot be made by companies. We will never live in a democratic society if decisions are made by organizations whose aim is to make private profits. They have a role to play in our societies, and I will go to that in 1 second with our proposal. But I think that what we are discussing here is who's ruling, who's making the decisions. Today, these are a few companies from the US, and they are doing it with a complicit role of many companies also based in Europe. And this needs to be said, because there is a risk to think that something that is European will automatically be better. And some of these companies are already deeply, deeply engaged in the system and profit from these structures. This is basically a very synthesized way of portraying today's big tech control AI value chain. There are many things to say here. I haven't spoken about the role of NVIDIA and TSMC. Let me say that these companies are also what I would describe as intellectual monopolies. They also base their power on the systematic concentration of intangibles that are co-produced by many, but then appropriated by them and used by them to capture value from other parts of their value chains. TSMC, even if it manufactures the semiconductors, is an organization that is constantly developing process innovations. It's not just that we can say, okay, we will design our semiconductors and check, done. Then we need to be able to produce the semiconductors. And this is also being monopolized. I will come back if you want to that later on, but my focus today is the other part of this stack or value chain. And it is this part, because I think that here it's possible to find a solution to the exercise of control beyond ownership that I was describing before. And this is basically what, in a nutshell, we are proposing. What we are proposing here is to replace, at least for the provision of public sector services. So we are not saying we eliminate big tech and we do a complete decoupling from one day to the other. We know that that is not feasible. What we are saying is for the public sector, and we can even start only from one subsector. Let's think of healthcare or education. There is a possibility to develop a public-led, international, and ecological AI value chain. And the way to do it for us is, first, with public physical or material infrastructure. We need to think about all the hardware part of this story, the concentration of data centers, the undersea cables, the satellites that big tech companies concentrate. It is not possible to think of an alternative without having a truly public physical infrastructure. But this is not enough. And I will give you one example. Europe can put a lot of money into the AI factories idea and train a lot of models in these supercomputers. But then these companies will need a place to sell the model as a service. And they will use the cloud of Amazon, Microsoft, and Google to do it, because that's where demand is found. So Europe will be wasting money by just doing the AI factories. We also need public universal platforms, and we know this from the social media discussions, but we also know if we think, for instance, of search engines, we really need to think of a global public good that is a search engine for everyone and not a search engine that is constantly feeding us with advertising. And we can continue thinking of different public universal platforms that should be accessible for everyone, that should be open source, and that should also be governed as a commons. And there is a lot of discussions here and in our paper about how to govern this and also how to audit all these solutions. And thinking internationally is also a way to anticipate potential capture by governments. Of course, I'm not saying that I'm giving this solution to a Milei government as an alternative to big tech. And to find a solution for that, we not only need to include in the decision-making process so civil society organizations, unions, social movements, but also to make it international. And also from an ecological perspective needs to be international to make a better use of the resources and to decide collectively what type of AI we want for what and for whom. But this will not work unless we include the other layer, the public marketplace layer. I insisted a lot here that it's not just about the physical infrastructure. It's not just about using compute as a service. We really need to think of an alternative public cloud marketplace where startup companies and many other companies can offer their services to whom? Because if the demand is in Amazon, Microsoft, and Google, who can demand all this? The state. So public procurement should be leveraged to purchase from these companies in a public cloud marketplace different digital solutions and truly offer to the company, the European, the Latin American, and so on companies that today offer their services inside Amazon, Microsoft, and Google an alternative. If they want to sell something to our states, they need to do it on this public cloud marketplace. So there is a competition layer, but it's not that we're giving to the privates the capacity to decide. And to conclude, let me say that the report complements this big, bold, but I still think feasible proposal with many other proposals. And perhaps among them, I want to highlight just that this is not only about how technologies are developed and offered, but also about decoupling research. And to do that, we really need to have independent research institutions that can be interdisciplinary, where we can put into question the type of science and technology that is being developed. And universities are today under a lot of pressure. They are completely divided under the pressure also of applying or dying, or publish and perish. And I think that to produce, in particular, digital technologies, one of the things that Google has understood when they purchased DeepMind is that you need to put all the clever minds together. And I think that this is part of what we need today, but it needs to be interdisciplinary. It needs to include not only the scholars, but also, again, the unions, the social movements, the civil society, also policy people. And we shouldn't forget that this is an alternative, but that this alternative can only work if at the same time we're regulating these companies and taxing these companies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This was very interesting. We have a small break because we have to do an Umbau here. And then I pass it on to Jan David Franke. He's in the policy team of Wikimedia, and he will moderate the next part. I think maybe you have a lot of stuff to discuss, and you will lead the discussion.
The opportunity to get a glass of wine, and that's appreciated and welcome. Before we move on to what's really going to be the second part of tonight, which is going to be a panel discussion with these four experts on the stage, we're going to have two more comments, first by Alexandra Gese and then by Adriana Gros, which are going to be around 10 minutes each. And I'm just going to hand over the mic to you, Alexandra. The floor is, you have a mic, perfect. The floor is yours.
Is it on? Yes, it is on. Okay. Good evening, and thanks first of all, great thank you to Cecilia and also to Katharina, but also especially to Cecilia for giving us this really strong and positive vision. I think this is something in times that are so disastrous, where we wake up every morning. I really felt was what Katharina said. You wake up every morning and say, what did he do while I was sleeping? And before, what everybody in Brussels and the Brussels bubble and the political bubble does is when we wake up in the morning, we grab coffee and then we read the Politico newsletter with the European and global news. And now I wake up and look at the New York Times to know what's going on in the US, because it's influencing us so much. 80% of our digital services and products come from the US, and I think Cecilia has given a really great overview of how disastrous this dependency is. And I have been among the people launching the idea of a Eurostack of digital sovereignty for Europe. And we often get the question, well, how do you define digital sovereignty? And I'm not going to go into that tonight. But when you have to fear J.D. Vance saying, if you want to enforce the Digital Services Act, then we might withdraw our troops from NATO or slap tariffs on you, then you know that you don't have digital sovereignty. That is very clear. I would like to echo a little bit the sense of urgency that we heard from these two interventions. And I think it's even worse. I mean, it's not only that the US are turning into an authoritarian system, and I can confirm that. I work a lot with the US. I've been there in November. I'm going back in April. I have a lot of contacts. I'm having trouble getting people in front of a camera for a webinar. You know, people from civil society, everybody says no. Or because they really physically fear for their family. You know, Trump has pardoned the Proud Boys. These are heavily armed far-right extremists, and now they're home. And they will be pardoned again, probably. But also because Trump threatened, and he's doing it, to investigate and prosecute. And they're suing just everybody. You know, people who work in disinformation, people who work in climate research, any kind of fact-producing institution, like NGOs, like universities, like media, they get sued. So this has an enormous chilling effect on the United States, and it's worse than what we are hearing, because we are hearing so little. We're only hearing Trump. We're not hearing the opposition, because they're afraid. They're really afraid. You know, I met a friend who's an expert on propaganda and disinformation. Some might know the name. He has 2 bestsellers in Germany out as well, Peter Pomerantsev. And he said, you know, what I'm hearing in Georgetown these days, in these really nice Georgetown houses, it's the same feel like Moscow in the beginning 2000s. And so it's really scary. And what they want is not only to turn the US an authoritarian system, they want regime change in Europe. And this is what we are seeing right now. And we are in Berlin here. We had an electoral campaign, which was heavily influenced by X. And there was a study out a couple of weeks ago. I don't know how many people have seen that, but it's really interesting because it analyzes how many tweets different political parties or candidates write, and how big the percentage is that really ends up in people's timelines. And you see, unsurprisingly, AfD accounting for 15% of the tweets written, but 37.8% of what people see in their feeds. Almost 40%, with only 15. That might be due to engagement-based ranking. The rest of the results, the research says, is not explainable by that. The Greens, which is my party, account for 23% of the tweets written. So that's a lot more than AfD, and only 5% of those actually ending up in people's timelines. The Social Democrats, 12% of tweets written, 1% of the timeline. So that's the kind of suppression of freedom of expression that we are experiencing here very concretely in Europe. And it's very frustrating for me when I go around and go around and talk to people. I always get that question, yeah, but on the Digital Services Act and all this tech regulation, doesn't that have an impact on freedom of speech? So this J.D. Vance narrative, it's working. And in the US, they even speak about the censorship industrial complex, and it's really coming over to Europe. Yeah, it's ridiculous, but they reduced every service basically working on foreign disinformation. Even Iranian disinformation is not working anymore in the US, already under Biden, because the attack was so bad. So what they really want is not only to change the US, they want to change Europe. And this was a long introduction, but it's important for the rest of what I'm going to say. So what X did is agenda setting in the electoral campaign, and every party wanted to talk about different topics. People care about the cost of housing and the cost of living and security, and what we talked about was migration. You know, that is one of the effects of X setting the agenda this way. Little bit more on what Cecilia said. I think the current political environment is extremely difficult for public sector-led initiatives. Because what not only the far right, but also the conservatives are doing is attacking what they call bureaucracy, any kind of regulation, And I think, everybody who has ever tried to do a digitalized process in Germany knows they do have a point, like BAföG or something like that. Digitalization in Germany is still, you look for the PDF, and then you download it, you print it, you fill it out, and you upload it again, if you don't have to send it by mail. So they do have a talking point there. But what really this talk about bureaucracy hides is trying to reduce the public sector, which is exactly what Musk is doing in a much more muscular way. But we are seeing the same thing in Brussels, where the whole climate regulation, now we have the omnibus regulation. That means we sort of open up everything and try to, in theory, streamline it. In practice, it will be, reducing people's rights, reducing the protection of climate, and so on. This is what's going on. And they intend to do that for digital as well. The whole digital legislation will be opened up. And that's not really going in favor of anything of the public sector. I have a second issue. I think what we are seeing, you said, well, you don't want to go give all this infrastructure in the hands of the Milei government. But once you create all this public sector initiatives and funding, how do you avoid doing that? I mean, the platforms that make sure that the right, the far right and the right have a better chance of winning the elections are still there. We don't have a perfect democracy in this moment. And we have Hungary already, and we have Italy. And in Italy, we are seeing that. I mean, the first thing the new Italian, well, it's not so new anymore, but the Meloni government did was getting rid of the leadership of public television and radio and installing a far-right leadership. And that is exactly what they would do if they had a public tech fund and a public-led AI fund or structure. And what they're doing, because they don't have up, they team up with Musk. Meloni teams up, is a great friend of Musk, and they're bringing Starlink in, and they want to give sensitive government and defense data to Starlink. So this makes it really, really complicated, because I would be totally in favor of a very, very strong, progressive counter strategy and very strong ideas, but how do we deal with the fact that we can't really control what happens to governments? That's not in our power. And the digital power concentration doesn't work for us, it works for the far right. What I do think, what we can do, on the other hand, I do see a lot of concern finally in the private sector, which wasn't there before. I think before companies were quite happy to work with American big tech and quite not convinced that we could do anything in Europe. And this is, I think, it's really changing a little bit. So I was at a conference in Milan yesterday, and that's basically was a lot of European cloud providers who are teaming up in a kind of federation to sell each other services, to have a common platform. So it's a little bit what you described, but it's not public-led, it's private-led. What they do need, and they'll come back to you, is a market, as you said rightly. And the cloud sector, you explained very well why it's so crucial, because it's everything as a service, it's everything in cloud, it's not just storage, it's basically everything. So this is where we should start in Europe, I think. So what we could do in political terms, it makes sure that the public administration has to buy the services from European providers, because they are the only ones who are really subject to GDPR and European regulation. J.D. Vance already told us we're not going to comply. You know, the Americans will not comply. Now they have President Trump fighting for them. So this should be a reason more to make sure that public administration can't put public data, citizens' data, in any way on an American cloud. And I think this is really one of the things that politically should be possible. I'm fighting for this right now in the European Parliament. We have this report in the Industry Committee on Digital Souveränity that I thought would be a great chance to do everything that Cecilia has been saying. It's not working out because EPP, which is the European version of the CDU-CSU in Germany, is saying no to anything public, no public funding, no buy European, we can't even mention public procurement. Yeah, it's pretty frustrating. This is why I do a little bit the reality check. So I think we really have to pick our battles And I think one of them is to make sure public administration only supports European companies who have to abide by European law. I'm very aware that companies like SAP, for example, or Siemens are very much involved in this American ecosystem, but it has to be clear that they have to come back. And we still have a lot of companies that really want to play by the European rules, and I think this is what we need to strengthen. So I see more cooperation of the public sector as customers, because that's what also our startups want, for a private digital ecosystem. A private digital ecosystem that really has to commit to European rules and to European values and try to get together in a networking way, not the one big European player that in the end would do exactly the same like Google, but the networking and the federation. This is what we are strong in Europe. We already have the Fediverse and everything to integrate all these systems, have networking, and to have a strong civil society. I think the role of civil society in criticizing this digital model has been absolutely crucial, because there was basically nobody else pointing out how the data is abused, what kind of power concentration. You know, you described very well the problems we have with academia and how Google and Amazon and so on dominate think tanks and academia. Civil society has been absolutely crucial in doing that job, but they're under attack. You know, we have seen in Germany the big request that the Conservative Party made on the funding, public funding for non-governmental organizations. We know they're being sued in the US. These people are after civil society. So this is another battle really to put up now to defend civil society, to make it even stronger, and not give in into this battle, in order to have the sort of triangle, the public sector as a customer, as a client, as those who are buying, the private sector that commits to European values and tries to work together, to network, to federate, and civil society calling, you know, leading the way, giving the utopia, but also holding them to account. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. We'll move on to Adriana's comment.
Thank you. Yeah, going last always comes with the challenge that I also give myself to tie everything together, so bear with me. But maybe first to state that clearly I'm not a policymaker, I'm also not a researcher. I believe, though, to put it a bit bluntly, in policy by doing. I think we really have to get stuff done, especially in a situation where you feel anxious, getting stuff done, starting small, prototyping, because like 90% of our ideas are not working. So we can have really big concepts, really big ideas, we can draft it all out, we can go after it. It's gonna fail to a really high degree. So you go step by step. You test, you iterate, you improve. It's frustrating. It's very, very non-rewarding to do the work of just putting it into practice, but that's what we really have to do. Because I'm feeling a little frustrated. I think in certain groups, maybe especially here in this room, most of the problems aren't really like super new. Like we have a concentration of power. We have problems with how the market works. The market didn't fix it, the market's gonna not fix it in the future, but we also cannot go just around it because we're not all just citizens, we're also consumers, and this group here is not representative, right? People make choices based on how stuff is available, cheap, and works. So I'm feeling like, okay, we know the problems, we know where we want to go, and now we need to start with concrete actions. And in Germany, I think we did a good job. We did a good job with establishing a few instruments, and we test them how they're working, and they're working just fine. They're way too small, but the Sovereign Tech Fund that I started is investing in digital infrastructure. The Center for Digital Sovereignty is trying to bring in startups and smaller companies to provide services for public administration. In Germany is teaming up with the Dutch and the French and more to provide alternatives. So we need to have this approach of getting stuff done now, because we know what we want, we know the problems, and let's put it into practice. Maybe because you said digital sovereignty, let's not define it right now. I think it's maybe worth saying how we understand it. It's self-determined use of technology, not just using it, but also producing it. So we believe that if we want to start somewhere, as I just said, start small, prototype, get bigger, get better, we need to look at the means of production. It doesn't really help if we provide one or two alternatives and then they turn out to be actually not great and not competitive, and we wasted many years and a lot of money. So by looking at, I always say, the software that developers need to develop software, we empower more people to prototype and test ideas and really like create alternatives. It's not the one solution that's going to fix all, I know. But if we forget about that layer, we will always build everything on sand. And the invisible, really like basic foundation underneath, nobody cares. There are groups of volunteers out there. They do that maintenance work since 15, 20 years. Nobody ever thinks about them unless it breaks. And then you better fix it real fast, because like my company, everyone's company, our governments, they all rely on it. And this is all out there, like maintainer communities have been like telling this story forever, and nobody ever cared about it. But now we have a window of opportunity, a political window of opportunity. So we should really bring the practitioners in. We should get the people on board that have been doing this work forever. We should ask them what they need, and we should fix it. After we did that, we need to look at the structural challenges. Who's doing this work? Like, is it diverse, the group of people that are doing it? No, it's not. Where are they sitting? In the US and Europe. How can we bring other parts of the world in to do the maintenance? Because more maintenance means more security, means better products. And this is how I believe we need to really, from the ground up, work on alternative futures to what we have at the moment. And with that, I look at my notes and see if I have more points that I want to make. As you can tell, I think it's really high time to get into the doing. But yeah, I think one reaction more to what you said about the power. I think it's power balance, because I totally agree that it's not going to be the way forward to have it everything in, like, let's say, a government's power or influence, because we see what the political realities are right now. And that's not going to be it. It's also not going to be it to just have it with the market. And it's definitely not the way forward to chain people who work in an open ecosystem as the maintainers to stuff that the whole world relies on, because those people never signed up for that. They just ended up in that situation, and that's it. So what we want is a balance of power, and for that we need very different approaches. I was asked, like, what could governments do, what could civil society do? So the German government, as I said, it came up with a few concrete new instruments. It put a little bit of money behind it. It's working really well. Maybe we can scale it. Then we have more public money for the public interest going into public infrastructure. That would be good, full stop. But we also need to think about how can we make digital volunteers more appreciated. Sounds stupid, but you know, like, our whole society wouldn't work without volunteers. Like, all the work that's been done by mostly women, but also lots of other people for centuries, it's what's keeping this economy alive, and our democracy as well. So we have found ways how to make it more rewarding to do volunteer work. We haven't really found that yet for digital volunteers. They do that mostly in the shadows, and it's like often perceived as some hobby nerd stuff, but it's just the same as providing service, like caring or like training your local soccer team or whatever. So maybe bring that a little bit more to the forefront. And then also companies. In the end, we talk about big issues that I think also not new. It's like taxation. But it's also like, how can we make sure that the distraction from the commons, because we have a global digital common. We have an open source ecosystem that is decentralized, and that is the foundation for everything right now. So how can we make companies realize, first step, that they depend on this, and make it easier for them to give back, like upstream, like not just distract value, base all their revenue models on the availability of free software as it would rain from the heavens, but then also, yeah, I mean, we invented taxes for that, right? Infrastructure. We invest in roads and bridges among other things, because we know our society, our economy, everything relies on it. So just move our thinking in the 21st century to also include the invisible stuff. I think that was maybe one thing missing in the 3 steps. It's not just hardware, it's also software. And software is not the cloud, just like there's stuff that you need to build the cloud. So we should also include that, because if that breaks, everything on top is going to fall apart. I think this room very well knows the XKCD dependency comic. Looks like a joke, it's not. So with that in mind, let's start working from the ground up. Let's start small, because it's going to make us faster and better. And then I think we're going to go somewhere with this really big work. I've also been a part of the Eurostack. We need this, but we're not going to do it from the top level down. We need to do it from the bottom up. And yeah, if we all move maybe at the same time, maybe we go places. Thanks.
So we've heard about the role of European policy. We've heard about the audacity of prototyping and starting small and going fast. We've also been, you've cautioned against entrusting the state with too much of this power. I would like to give Cecilia the opportunity to reply to the comments you've just heard and kick the conversation off that way.
Sure. I actually want to follow up on 3 things. One, about what Alessandra was saying about the governments, absolutely. And this is why, for us, in our proposal is crucial, and we dedicate a whole section to discuss why we need technological internationalism and what this can even not be left just at the EU level. And this is why we also think that a space where this public-led digital stack or value chain could be crafted and governed could be the United Nations, for instance. So we are not thinking of individual governments, we are not thinking of let's say, one AI model, one data center, a set of cables, and so on and so forth for every country in the world. We're thinking of a centralized solution with a, if you want, decentralized governing structure. And this decentralization, it's part of what can contribute to make it more democratic, and will not only include the different governments of the world sitting on the table and deciding. And in that case, if you think of, for instance, how the governments are split in Latin America. Yes, we have Milei, but we also have Petro, Boric, Lula, the new government in Uruguay, Sheinbaum. So there are ways to fight that battle. But again, it shouldn't only be a matter of those in power governing this public-led alternative, but actually also sitting on the table representatives from unions, representatives from the civil society, representatives from social movements, because they are also, as you were saying, those that are concerned about the public good. And they can be democratically elected, and we can discuss more about the details, but just to emphasize that definitely we think that the solution is not techno-nationalism. Nonetheless, there needs to be a form of digital protectionism in terms of states being capable of deciding democratically what type of data is harvested or not, the type of taxes that these companies need to pay, what are the digital priorities for a country, and so on and so forth. So really, I think it's a matter of thinking or trying to have like creativity at the level of developing new institutions. So like a sort of institutions imagination to think of new ways of governing this structure that are neither in the hands of specific governments nor in the hands of a few private companies. I think that going to what I would love to hear the details of what these companies are trying to do in Italy and in Europe, but for what I know, some of the companies what are aiming to do is to offer infrastructure as a service. And if that's the aim, so to offer storage in Europe, to offer compute in Europe, this can also be perfectly integrated into our a public-led cloud marketplace. It's not just about giving, when we were saying this competition layer, this is a space where we can think of, for instance, AI apps. We can also think of software as a service there, infrastructure as a service provided by companies, platforms as a service, but it's about where the rules are made, where the terms of the agreement are defined. And this is in the cloud as a marketplace, and this is why we keep on saying that this needs to be a public-led alternative, because we need to put on the table that there are political and economic decisions being made there that influence the whole network and that then influence every aspect of our society. Just going very briefly to what Adriana was saying, I think that sometimes we mistakenly keep on thinking of this sort of contradiction of states or markets. States actually are market actors, and what we see today, more than markets, is a planned society. We lived in a form of centrally planned society. It's just that the planners are corporations, and they pretend that they are doing market exchanges with all the other companies that they control, with the universities, with the public sectors, but they are the ones that are controlling beyond ownership. They are the ones that are controlling labor processes in companies that they do not own. So they seem to be market exchanges, but actually they are not. And actually this is an opportunity. This is an opportunity for the state to do something different than participating in a market. States should lead, and what for me needs to be a democratic plan. We need democratic planning, and this democratic planning, or planning to be democratic, really needs to sit on the table, all the actors that I was mentioning before. So for us, to some extent, this project for a digital public-led stack or value chain for people and the planet is also about democratic planning. It's also about challenging how corporations are planning today and offering an alternative. And this is why, for me, it's not so much about rewarding individuals, but rewarding the collective work. I think that what we need the way to counterbalance the power of these companies is not to just render visible all the labor that is appropriated by these companies, both in the open source and, as I was showing before, in the public research community and from startups and so on and so forth, but to emphasize that the production of knowledge is always a common process, is always intrinsically collaborative. Even when we are disagreeing, we are doing it on the basis of knowledge that was produced by others. So instead of just recognizing the cherry on top of the cake and just saying this is the innovator, and not even because Elon Musk is not the person that is working inside Tesla or Starlink, we really need to acknowledge that we are collectively as a society producing knowledge, and we should profit all together of those outputs.
Okay, here we go again. Katarina, I'd like to ask you a question. In the aftermath of Trump being elected, we talked a lot about anti-fascist economics, a concept that was proposed by economist Isabella M. Weber prominently. How can we build democratic digital infrastructure that's anti-fascist, that's a bulwark against what you've very aptly described as a big shit show?
Yeah, I really think we shouldn't adopt the idea of technical solutionism to all aspects of our lives, because I don't think that there is a machine that can save us from authoritarian mindsets. And unfortunately, I also don't think that, authoritarian safeguards or digital infrastructure as a possible safeguard for a civil society, for democracy, would be the best selling point, especially to conservative parties when we talk about large projects. I think we honestly, and I'm very sad about it, but in the state of the world, we should maybe also talk more about, not maybe free software, but digital sustainability, not only about digital freedom, but digital sovereignty, about market power, about chances. And I really think we need more studies about how much money is wasted in the general society through the stickiness on purpose in some IT products, through login. When I think alone of all the money that is spent on digital services which are created with interoperability on purpose, with login on purpose. When we start also to argue on more about the aspect of economic options, and I hate to say that, or I hate to acknowledge it, that this seems to be more important to some people than saving democracy, because unfortunately, especially in the more conservative part of our society, I feel that people don't feel the threat, people don't see what I see, and that's why they wouldn't be likely to invest in such large projects, although I think they are necessary right now more than ever. So I don't think that more equal, equally available digitalization can save our society, but it can be a crucial part. But in order to get there, I think we also need to talk about how we frame this whole discussion inside our community and how we sell our idea that can be a part of the project to save democracy to people outside our bubble.
Alexandra, I think you've made it clear that you do see what Katharina is seeing. You've recently stated that Europe needs to stand its ground against the Trump government trying to keep the EU from enforcing the DSA and the DMA. You've said that we, I quote, it needs more courage to defend democracy or else we might not have one anymore very soon. How do you think democratic digital public infrastructure can help in mustering up this courage?
Mustering up this courage. It's a difficult question. I think the courage, we have to muster it up ourselves. I think that's not something we can give, the task we can give to an infrastructure. I agree with Katharina on the techno-solutionism. But I do think that, for example, having different social networks would be extremely helpful. I mean, that would change the whole conversation. Just going back to everybody having the same chances to have their opinion expressed on the internet, without the distortion. What I explained before was a specific study, but we all know that disinformation every single time beats information. And extremist opinions, hate, and so on are disseminated much quicker than any other kind of content. So starting there, I think that's important. I worked a lot on the regulation that would allow us to do that. Now we need to really enforce it. And I'm not getting answers from the European Commission when I say, well, this is what we need to do now to stop, for example, the algorithm that promote these enormous amounts of disinformation. Trump can go around and say Ukraine started the war. And there was a small outcry, but how will people in 20 years really know that Russia started the war? I'm not sure. I read this thing yesterday on traveling. It's an old book by Hannah Arendt about lying in politics. And she quotes this anecdote from Clemenceau, who's being asked after World War I, what about the guilt for the First World War? Whose guilt is it? How will historians see that in 20 years? And Clemenceau says, well, I don't know what a historian's going to say about it. But one thing is absolutely sure, nobody will say that Belgium invaded Germany. Well, about Ukraine and Russia, I'm not sure in 20 years now we've released that to the platform. So I think the first thing is to start different social networks. And I'm working a little bit with an initiative that's called Free Our Feeds. I don't know how many in the room have heard this? Because this is the bubble who should know about these people. No, very few. Okay, that's interesting. So you have to bring them to the Weizenbaum, I think. That's a group of people from civil society, academia, great people who basically take the AT protocol. That's a protocol that Blue Sky runs on, but Blue Sky is American venture capital. And they're trying to put the AT protocol, which is a technology which you could build other social networks on, in a foundation with a few conditionalities attached. So they would then give the possibility to startups, entrepreneurs, venture capitalists to build social media applications on that basis, but you can't abuse users' data, you can't have toxic algorithms, needs to be open source, transparent, and so on. And I think that's a great chance, because when you see how many people switched from X to Blue Sky right now, I think this is a window of opportunity. So just having a place where we can communicate without being distorted by an American billionaire, I think that would be something very, very important. But in order to be able to do that, we also need the independent clouds and the whole hardware, the physical infrastructure, because otherwise they can still switch it off. But I think that's something really, really important to do. Otherwise, I mean, it's the basic. It's no surveillance and no monopolies or oligopolies. But how do we get there? That's the difficult question. And there I agree a little bit with Adriana. Let's really celebrate the things that are happening. Let's do something. You know, just admiring the problem will not make it go away. So this is, you know, if European cloud providers get together and build a common platform, that would be interesting for customers to have more services in the private sector. I think that's great. But then we need to do this, use these possibilities to bring in people who can build different social networks with transparency, no surveillance, no targeted advertising, and so on, where we can really exchange our opinions and build movements together. I mean, Black Lives Matter and feminist movements were built a lot on the internet when it worked better than today. So let's get back to that times. But now it's really dangerous.
You're saying that we shouldn't let ourselves be extorted by American billionaires, but what about how can we make sure that we don't replace American billionaires with European billionaires and replicate the oppressive structures that we've created that were created in the US with oppressive structures that we might create in Europe? We've touched a bit upon this, but I'd like to explore this a bit further. Whoever wants to speak to this, feel free to chime in.
I can do it. I mean, I think this is just your way to tell me, emphasize the fact that it needs to be public-led. I think that there is this cannot be decided by one or a few individuals. And it's not a matter, again, it's not a matter of whether they are crazy or not. Yes, indeed. In particular, Elon Musk, Javier Milei, I mean, all these people should be treated for mental health issues, and this is serious. The fact that a lot of people around the world are voting knowing that part of those that will be in office have mental health issues speaks a lot of our society. But we shouldn't remain at the surface. This is a tip of an iceberg. The problem that we are facing is not that we can just replace. It would be way easier to just say, okay, this is a problem that we have the Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, we make a list, we just erase them and we put other people there and everything is solved. This seems very easy, but actually will not solve a problem at all. What we have is an opportunity to discuss how we are governing our societies. What these companies are pushing us to do, if we choose to take this in our hands, is to rethink about how we make decisions about what do we want to produce, how, by whom, who is rewarded for what is produced, what are the priorities that we put in place when deciding this, to what extent we take into account that we are, as humans, are not living alone in this planet and that this planet has limits, to what extent the knowledge that is produced is really driven by fulfilling collective needs, problems, and also bringing us joy. And I think that if there is something that I would like to add and emphasize, also connected to, and I fully agree with what Katerina was saying about the need for a vision. I think that all this cannot work without a counter narrative. These companies are intellectual monopolies not only because they control all the models, the data, they're also intellectual monopolies because they control the narratives. A way of doing it is controlling social media. By more broadly, this idea that regulation stifles innovation is stuck in the head of every policymaker. And this is just because they have a narrow way of thinking about innovation. They only think about the one that has patented, the one that is selling the solution. They're not thinking about all the organizations and people that have collaborated for that. So really it's about defining ways to empower us all. And I think that without decoupling from big tech, And a way to do it is starting directly from the public sector. We cannot ask companies to move away from these clouds. We cannot ask individuals. They will hate us if we tell them, tomorrow we are shutting Google down. I'm so sorry. We cannot do it, but states can do it. States can show that there is a possibility to develop technology in a different way. States can be funding different type of research, research that is decoupled from big tech. People like Jan LeCun should not be invited to discuss the European AI Act. First of all, because he's an AI scientist, not someone expert in policy making or in the ecological, human rights, social, more generally, political, economic implications of AI. But also because he is part of a corporation that is generating the problem. So really, I think that there is a chance to rethink about how states are working, how the public sector is working, and make it better. Instead of just saying this doesn't work, so we don't try there, let's make the commitment that we are going to work together to make it better. And I think that there, civil society has a big role to play, because civil society indeed has played a critical role, and I also think, and I need to say not only because I see myself as part of that, but I also think that part of the academic community has also played a very critical role. But this is definitely not enough. We also need to be part of it. We also need to engage politically where decisions are made. We need to make ourselves invited and sit on those tables. And it's not just to sit and wait for a policymaker to want to do it. Yeah. And also emphasizing and echoing that there is no technology that will solve neither the ecological crisis nor the political economic crisis we live in. We need to put technologies at the service of solving all this, but technologies by themselves will never do it. And especially those that believe it are those that are completely trapped in the idea of technological neutrality. And every technology, just because it's developed by people, is charged by our histories, our ways of thinking, are always socially constructed. So it makes really no sense to think about technology as something neutral.
I would like to add, but it's very important also from my point of view to see that there is this narrative about what is efficient. Yeah? Elon Musk is claiming that he's working on some institution, whatever it is, which is working on making organizations more efficient. But efficiency is only a narrative in order to cut down spending for regulation, for consumer protection, also maybe leverage some possibilities of this new job for personal interest, I guess. And I'm really frightened when I hear in the news that the boss of Deutsche Telekom says that maybe we also need something like DOS. Yeah, I don't think so. Has anyone a telecom contract? Maybe think about this news item when you think about renewing it or not. And I also think we need to see the bigger picture of that we don't live in a time of a revival of neo-capitalism. This is a revival of anarcho-capitalism, of very Vulgärliberalismus, yeah? Is it also a word in English? It's useful, yeah. I mean, right now we see that the bubble around Musk, they are not only promoting like new ideas. These are all old ideas. Fascism is not only an old idea, but also quoting Mises, Hayek. I mean, these were guys we read in history of economic thought with the explanation. Yeah, this is history. Like they were so naive. Now we know more. Yeah. Actually, economics is a science, yeah, and actually we have findings about minimum wages, about regulation and so on, and market imperfections. And this whole narrative about efficiency also implies that the narrative of big tech, but also of these Vulgärliberalisten, defines defines what is the problem that needs to be solved. Yeah, and we need to look in all these debates very, very carefully. What is the problem? How it is defined? Does it include all the different stakeholders we named, all the different aspects of society? And I don't think that in most debates we do it. And actually, I'm very frightened about what will happen in the next months or years in Germany, because parts of the Conservative Party in Germany are also following this narrative. I don't think we need a German tech millionaire advising the German government that there are these ideas, you know. I think we really need to start a counter-narrative, like this is scientifically proven that we need regulation. Yeah, everything else is outdated and is naive.
Talking about regulation, we're at the Bits Bäume Policy Lab, so maybe to close this off, just in 2 sentences, if you can, if there's one policy that you could have put in place right away, which one would it be and why? Maybe we'll start from the left and go right. We'll start with you, Cecilia.
Sure. Well, I already anticipated, and I think that this is states decoupling from big tech immediately. I think that this already creates a space and time and stops the expansion of the dependency. And yeah, I would say that.
I agree. From academia to politics and operational terms, forcing public administration, state actors to buy from European companies that really comply with European legislation, and that means also with European values, as long as we have them. I think the second one is really a bold utopia and creating a narrative, exactly like Katharina said. We cannot stay quiet in this moment, but we have to stand up and fight for what we believe in and have the strong narrative and not just step back and say, oh, you know, what are we going to do? So that's super important, as long as we can in Europe, because in the US, they're having difficulties doing that.
On that, just very briefly, I think that this counter narrative needs to go beyond or overcome the growth imperative. All these discussions about efficiency are super linked to the fact that it is assumed that innovation will drive economic growth, and then eventually we'll get progress and a better society. We need a counter narrative about what that better society should look like, not about how innovation and then growth and competitiveness and all the Draghi report and all that. Honestly, this is not what we need at the moment, not in the midst of an ecological crisis. We need to rediscuss what progress and a good way of living means in this context today.
Adriana?
I would argue we took a wrong turn when we made efficiency and digitalization a goal in itself, techno-solutionism, but you can be very efficient in doing absolute nonsense, and you can digitalize stuff that you better should not digitalize. So that's, I think, a general problem, more than just a narrative. And I would like just to come back to because I didn't have the chance to react. We are using public procurement to buy maintenance and infrastructure. So we're bringing the state into being a player on a market where it should have been a long time ago. I think my policy recommendation is that this is a public service. Like, infrastructure maintenance in the 21st century is not just roads and bridges, it's also software. And with that, I don't mean the services that I, as a consumer, interface with, but how it's getting produced. So thinking about this in a more holistic way when we think about infrastructure, and the public's job in investing public money in infrastructure is what we need to understand. And then we need to develop the right kind of instruments to do that from a public perspective, and also empowering by then citizens. So the problem is it's mostly individuals at the moment, and sovereignty starts from the individual in my definition. But of course, in the end, it's about making decisions as the societies that we are in an independent way.
Katharina, in 2 sentences, your policy.
Yeah, my low-hanging fruits Christmas wish since years is public money, public code, and I would like to stick with it.
Great. I think this thought really ties together many of the themes that we've touched upon tonight, and brings us to the end of our discussion. Let me make some closing remarks before we can get together over snacks and drinks and have a more informal chat about digital sovereignty, about democratic public infrastructure. I would like to thank the panelists for your expertise and for your valuable perspectives. Maybe we can get another round of applause. You're going to have to do this 3 more times, so stay vigilant. A big thanks to Aline, Rike, Leonie, and Miret, and all the rest of the people who organized and conceptualized tonight's event. A big round of applause for them as well. Big thanks to the Weizenbaum Institute for having us here tonight, especially Evelyn, Marcel, and Johanna. They also deserve a round of applause. And the last applause is for all of you. Thank you for being here tonight with us. And that's it. Keep the conversation going. Have a lovely rest of your evening. I'll see you at the buffet.